Okay. So, right. So, all right. So we know Passport is middleware that should make things easier, but you don't believe it does.
I actually haven't really tried this. I was like office hours with Justin and tried to do passport authentication in GitHub. And though I was exactly following him, my code started giving some errors.
Okay.
And I never got back to that.
Okay. Okay. So, all right. So Passport is all theoretical for you.
Yeah.
Has anybody else used Passport?
Tried and failed several times.
Tried and failed. What happened?
I think that I'm just not understanding a lot of the documentation right around chip like implementing strategy and setting it up from the server side. Yeah, I think I've just had some missing parts.
Okay.
I also think because I've implemented authentication, just like Bcrypt and my own stuff, that I'm trying to write too much of it, and I don't get.
Okay. Okay. So Bree has tried using Passport, but is reluctant to give up control of. Yeah. And I would say that if you are just doing local authentication, and when I say local authentication, I mean just doing username password stuff. It's not that hard to write your own middleware and check for login, right? So maybe you don't even need Passport in that case. The case that I'm going to talk, so there are two Passport cases I want to talk about today. One is for JWT. What does JWT stand for? Yeah, I think it's JSON Web Token. Yeah. That's okay. So JSON Web Token. Or so that's what I'm going to talk about first. And then we're also going to use Hannah's project, and I think Hannah is probably like quickly getting her project into a state where we can look at it later, to use Passport with OAuth. Hannah's been having an issue with it, and so we're going to all get familiar with how she's using it, and then we're going to troubleshoot it. And we'll see how that goes. OAuth and I are not the best of friends, but maybe, what's that? Yeah.
And so now there is another authentication library called Okta, and on their website it says in the quote, I love doing authentication, and it's just no one developer.
Yeah. I think OAuth is very choosy about who it lets be its friend, right? I think OAuth has very few friends, actually. So, okay, good. I'm glad this is being recorded so that I can announce to the world everybody hates OAuth. All right, so let's look at Passport. And I just wanted to talk. Let's just look a little bit at the documentation at this general. Okay, so Passport is authentication middleware for Node, designed to serve a singular purpose, which is to authenticate requests. When writing modules, encapsulation is a virtue, so Passport delegates all other functionality to the application. In other words, all it does is authentication. They're just throwing in buzzwords like you wouldn't believe. So encapsulation and separation. What'd you say, LaToya? Yeah. So the separation of concerns keeps code clean and maintainable and makes Passport extremely easy to integrate into an application. Okay, all right. So, it is if you have Stephen Greider guiding you every step of the way. In modern web applications, authentication can take different forms. So providing a username and password. So that's what we've been talking about for you. What you've been doing is this username password authentication, using your database to verify and writing your own middleware to control. Also using OAuth, so that's sort of the second category, And then the third category is this: services that expose an API often require token-based credentials to protect access. What does this mean? What can somebody parse that sentence for me?
Okay, well, I'm just a little something. So the example is YouTube app, YouTube's API, and it requires this token that you have to first get from Google, and then into your app. So then,
okay. All right, cool. So you can use YouTube's API if you have this token. It can be. However, yeah, it can be.
oh, maybe that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, an API key. Here we're what we're going to talk about here is this JSON web token idea. And basically, when you make, who's made a React application here? Okay, the React application has two parts, right? It's got the front end and the back end. Usually they're entirely different servers. The back end does not serve any HTML. It just serves API, right? So it just serves JSON as its responses. And then the front end is what serves all of the HTML. Is this sounding familiar? In order to have that front end, when it makes a request, let the back end know that the user has already been authenticated, it sends a token. So what happens, let's see, wow, all of the whiteboards have been taken far, far away. So yeah, that would be great, thanks, Di. So what happens is the client, the React client, will log the user in. It'll get the username and password from the user, and it'll send it to the server. And the server will use a local strategy, a local passport strategy, to check the database and see whether that login is valid. If that login isn't valid, it'll send back an error. But if the login is valid, it will send back a token, a JavaScript web token. And I talked a little bit about some of this. Thanks, Mita. I talked a little bit about some of this on Tuesday for people who were here. But basically, that JavaScript web token is the user ID, but totally encrypted with a secret key. So the idea is you don't know my secret key. So you can't just make up a user ID, just like there must be a user ID 4 and give me the token for user ID 4 so that you have access to all of that, because the token doesn't just say 4. It's 4 encrypted with my secret key, and you need to know the secret key to decrypt it. So you can't make up a token that's going to work unless you know my secret key. Does that make sense? So the way the flow works, and sorry for people who are just watching this, the way the flow works is, so here's the React, or whatever your front end is. Here's the API, which is the Express server. So the user puts in a username and password, and React sends the username and password, and the API gets that, and if it's good, it'll send back this token, or JWT, JSON Web Token. Then, when you have this protected resource, right, like let's say the user profile page, when it asks for the resource, it will actually send the JavaScript web token. And then the server will look at the web token, decide whether or not it is valid for this request. If it is, it will send back the resource. If it's not, it'll send back an error that it's unauthorized. And this is nice because you don't have to be storing the username and password on the client and re-authenticate every time. If you have this JavaScript web token, you can assume that you're authentic. Other questions on that? Yeah.
Is it a new token every time?
No. Well, is it a new token every
When they
time?
log in,
No. It's going to be the same token for every login. So if somebody evil is watching this communication and steals the web token, then they can authenticate. But if they were evil and watching the communication, they could steal the username and password. So it's not any less secure than sending a username and password.
But the JWT on the server has like some sort of like salt type thing, right? That like even if you intercept it mid-air, like it still has to be verified with like this little secret on the server.
It does,
Yeah.
right? But I can't tell whether this JavaScript web token is coming from this, like my application, or whether it's coming from, little evil guy over here, right?
Oh.
And so the fact is that the JWT, it is a secret. You can't make one up because of the encryption. So if I don't have access to this network traffic, I'm not going to be able to guess what the JavaScript web token is. But if I do have access to this, if you have the token, you're good. So all of this should be done over HTTPS, just the way you would do username and password, right? You need to protect your token the same way you would protect the username and password. Okay. Okay, so
So is it kind of like just authenticating every time? In a way, it's
in a way, it's authenticating every time, but the first time it's authenticating using the username and password, and all of the subsequent times it's authenticating using the JavaScript web token. JSON web token. JSON. The JWT. Okay. Okay. So Passport has this passport.authenticate. And then it has a callback. And this is just the middleware. And if it has a callback, then the rec.user is going to contain the authenticated user that you can then do whatever you want with that information when you get to the next function. By default, if authentication fails, it'll send a 401 unauthorized status, and any additional route handlers won't be invoked. And then if it succeeds, the next handler will be invoked and the rec.user property will be set. Or will be set to the authenticated user. You got to configure your strategies. And you can also do some redirects. I haven't done the redirects because Stephen Greider doesn't use them. The redirects are only going to be applicable if you are doing, if you actually have your front end on your Express server, right? You're not going to want to redirect on your API server. Does that make sense? Like redirects are just for front end users only. Flash messages I'm not going to talk about. It's also only if you are if your Express server is your front end server, and it's a feature of Express, flash messages in general, and you have to use Connect Flash and so forth. Disabling sessions. So if you are using the local strategy where and you want, instead of having this JWT like I was talking about here, you want just to have a cookie on the client that keeps getting sent to you, then you can use sessions with Passport. However, in what we're doing here, we don't need sessions because we're going to be sending the token. We're going to be sending the token directly, so we don't have to rely on any cookie communication. Yeah.
Are there like specific pros and cons versus like using sessions?
If you're doing it with a, if you're doing it with where your Express is your front-end server, then using sessions makes it easier because you don't have to manually handle the communication that the user is authenticated. You don't have to manually set the token. However, if you are using an API, then sessions are more difficult, as we were sort of talking about on Tuesday, and it's much simpler to just every time manually send the authentication. A custom callback, we're not going to deal with that either. Okay, and then here's configuration and strategies. So I'm gonna now actually go to the code. So I have a excuse me, a repo that I made. Okay, so Learners Guild, and I think I called it like Passport Examples or something like that. GitHub is slow this morning, or maybe it's just the internet, but so Passport.js examples. I had grand plans of like, you know, doing a ton of different strategies in here, and then I just didn't have time. So I also haven't added a README yet, but I will. But basically, okay, so basically we have a basic Express app here. I am going to clone this. You are welcome to clone it too, or fork it, or whatever you want to do with it. Did somebody just post something? Like I heard all the Slack. Okay, so all right, so let's look at this. Maybe it's just my computer that's slow. All right, so first let's look at the package.json and see what we have as our dependencies. So I'm using .env here. I'm using EJS. Although actually we can remove this because I thought I was going to do some front end stuff with this too, but again, I just ran out of time. JWT, simple. So we're using this to create JSON encrypted JSON web tokens. I'm going to take all of these off too, simply because they're just not necessary. Okay, so NodeMon, Passport, JWT. All right, so this is to be able to use JSON web tokens with Passport. This is to be able to use Passport, and this is to be able to create the JSON web tokens. All right, so let's do an npm install. Now you might think that because I'm doing authentication that I'm going to have a database here so that I can authenticate my users. But I decided that this lecture was not about databases. This lecture was about Passport. So I just made, yeah, I think it is my computer. Sorry, my computer is just going very slow. Come on. What's this repo called? It's called, here, let me post in, I'll just make you all click again. Oh, my computer. Getting the beach ball. Okay, github.com/learnersguild/passport.js-examples. Whoa, All right. Well, hold on. Let me project again. No, not there. Okay. I don't know what's going on with my computer. Has somebody gotten the repo? Yeah, yeah. Like if people have reached the repo, can somebody post it in the phase practice? Thanks, Jen. And then while you all clone that, I'm gonna restart my computer because this is ridiculous. So.
So I've always been curious about when to start the report, like why not just take comments?
Yeah, why not just straight clone it? Does anybody have an answer for that?
Forking versus cloning?
Mm-hmm.
When you put